For me, one of the things that was always a big connector point is the idea of hope and resistance and rebellion. That's my ancestors. They fought for their freedoms. They were the resistance. That's probably why I'm here today.
Every day we're starting.
Really little, Empire Strikes Back.
Everyone has a Star Wars story. I'm Jordan Hembrough, and I'm meeting Star Wars fans virtually who have been inspired and changed by the galaxy far, far away. Today I'm connecting with Lee from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Lee found a deep connection with Star Wars through the story of the Rebel Alliance and its own parallels with his own Native American ancestors. This is Lee's Star Wars story. Thanks for doing this for us. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. This is pretty awesome.
So the first thing I want to acknowledge is that when I first spoke to you on the phone, you are actually Dr. Lee Francis, correct?
That is correct. I have my PhD in education.
So tell me about your first foray into the larger world of Star Wars. How'd you get introduced to it?
It came out the year I was born, but I have this very vague old memory of going to see Empire. My mom told me a story about it and she was like, we took you to see it. You were like super quiet. But the first one that I truly remember was seeing Jedi. And I remember I was visiting my grandparents in the summertime and they took me out to see Jedi. And after that, I've seen every one of them that has come out subsequently in the theater.
I know your heritage is so important to you. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so my family is from the Pueblo of Laguna, which is about 45 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I grew up kind of bi-coastal. My dad worked for the feds, so I was kind of a suburban native. And specifically as a Pueblo, like it's a different sort of history. We did face colonization back in 1680 in the 1500s, 1600s, but we didn't face a removal. So our homeland has stayed our homeland. And then I came back out here when I was in my 20s and started teaching. So I started teaching out at the reservation in the Pueblo where my family is from. So kind of coming full circle as an adult.
You've also brought your heritage into your business and career as well. Tell me about that.
So I started out, my PhD's education, I started out as a teacher. I worked with Native kids. I worked back on the reservation. I started to notice really that they just didn't have a lot of resources where they could see themselves represented in popular media that wasn't like a historical or a stereotype. So I had some friends and some really cool illustrators and I was like, let's start making some comics. So we started a company called Native Realities. And a year after that, we opened up my shop, which is Red Planet Books and Comics. We really are the only native comic shop in the world. Most of what we feature on our shelves and stuff is native related from a lot of these artists and folks that I work with. 2 years after that, I launched the Indigenous Comic-Con. The idea was just to bring together Native American folks doing really cool things in sci-fi and fantasy. And one of the early people that I reached out to was one of the voice actors for the authorized Navajo translation of Star Wars. And she cosplayed in C-3PO because that's who she did the voice for. So the last time we got to do this, which was 2018, before everything shut down, we brought the entire voice cast of Navajo Star Wars. It was brought back together. They had a whole panel on it, and every year since we started, we always show Navajo Star Wars at the end of the event.
Did Star Wars actually impact your love of stories and influence you to open a comic book business?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge influence in moving towards that. And it has continued to be an influence. It's there in my psyche of, all right, how do you tell this story? How do you tell a story that moves people? How do you tell a story that captures their attention? And how do you do it in a way that you can convey meaning, you can convey values, and still do it with lasers and lightsabers?
Lee, how has your heritage actually informed your view of Star Wars?
I think it's built on the idea of like hope and resistance and rebellion.
Rebellions are built on hope.
For me, one of the things that was always a big connector point is that Pueblo people actually had one of the first successful rebellions here in North America. In 1680, the collection of Pueblo villages and peoples that were all up and down here in the Central Corridor in New Mexico, they had been under Spanish oppression for about 100 plus years. The Spanish colonial empire was pretty brutal. So that went on for about 100 years and finally the Pueblos were tired of it. And in 1680, they launched this rebellion. They had sent around this knotted rope and each day they would untie one of the knots. And when it was a straight rope, that would signify that was the day. So that way they could coordinate to launch this rebellion all at the same time. That's the rebellion, that's the resistance. That's exactly what Star Wars is built upon. It was something that was always incredibly important for me to recognize where those overlaps were. And I was like, that's my ancestors. They were the resistance. That's probably why I'm here today, is because they fought for their freedom. They told the empire, the Spanish Empire, you're not welcome here. We want to be free. And I actually made a fun thing for my Facebook page called Rebellions Are Built on Rope. That was a shout out for all my Pueblo nerds. So that's how it's really informed, influenced, just kind of always been present in my life.
Lee, you've really taken it upon yourself to keep your family roots alive and pass them down to other generations. Why is that so important to you?
For me personally, it's the stories I grew up on. Coming from a Native American heritage and a Pueblo heritage, there's a lot of responsibility in holding those stories and to make sure that that spirit of rebellion, I think, is passed on. I mean, if we equate it across the board in Star Wars, that's how the rebellion continued on in the darkest moments, right? It's the stories of Luke and this thing called the Force that nobody knew of anymore. It had kind of evaporated.
The Force, a Jedi. It's all true.
So I think that knowing the stories, the passing on of stories, it's so that our next generation continues to be inspired by their people, the fact that they survived, and the fact that they're still they're part of the resistance.
Lee, as I'm sitting around talking to you, I can't help but wonder, do you see echoes of any real-life Pueblo heroes in Star Wars?
Yeah, so as part of the rebellion, like our big thing, we have one of our heroes is a man by the name of Popeye. We actually organized all of the Pueblos to come together and launch this rebellion. For me, the closest equation would probably be Leia, because he was the leader of the rebellion. He was who everybody looked towards. So I think that would be our hero for us as Pueblo people.
Indigenous people and art have always really played a big part in the Star Wars universe. How do you feel about that?
I particularly love it. I do not speak for all Native folks, but I love it because it's very subtle. With Rey, it's the bun, it's the three-set, which is a Navajo style of hair. The Ewok are taken from the Miwok, which is a tribe of California natives. And they are actually one of my favorites because without the Ewoks, they're not winning the rebellion. It is the Ewoks that help them. So if we now take a different equation and say that the rebels are the Americans against the British, it was the strategic warfare, fighting from trees, using traps, that the native people back east taught the Americans. And that was what, in many ways, a lot of historians look at one of the things that helped turn the tide. So that's why I always look at the Ewoks in a different way. A lot of people are just like, teddy bears. And I was like, no, hang on. They were really awesome because they were actually the indigenous people, and without them, you don't blow up Death Star 2. I mean, even right now, I was saying The Mandalorian has one of those really cool moments when they're about to cross the desert and Tuskens come up and they stop him and he's like, this is their land. And I was just like, that was awesome for me because I was like, yep, they're the indigenous people of Tatooine. So that is one of those moments where like the indigeneity of the people in a galaxy far, far away are all present. And I loved it. I loved it so much.
I could sit and talk to you all night long. I want to really thank you for doing this.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and may the Force be with you.